Can you imagine what an ordinary day looked like inside a Roman brothel? Welcome to the Lupanar, Rome's temple of pleasure, where desire had a price and every climax came with a cost. On the walls hangs what we might call pornography today. But this isn't about art. This is about fantasy and fulfillment. Ever wondered what really happened behind the doors of ancient Rome's brothels? How much did pleasure cost in the eternal city? What did the inside of a lupanar look like? Why were the walls covered in erotic paintings? And why did they sometimes resemble a menu? And why did every prostitute have blonde hair? Today, we'll show you all of it. Welcome to Horologium Historia. Let's dive in. The Roman Empire, cradle of law, architecture, and military power, but also of unrestrained indulgence. While virtues were debated in the forums and senators pledged loyalty to tradition, just a few steps away, houses of pleasure thrived, devoted to a very different set of values. In the Roman world, prostitution was not only legal, but regulated, taxed, and entirely ordinary, just like a bakery or a barbershop. A man who bought bread in the morning could just as easily buy a woman at night, and no one batted an eye. The Romans had a word for brothel, lupanar, literally, the wolf's den. These lupanaria were found in busy neighborhoods, near markets, baths, bakeries, or mills. In Pompeii, a city of around 80,000 people, archaeologists have uncovered over 25 brothels, suggesting that demand was considerable. Today, we'll step inside one of these houses of pleasure. And not just as observers, we'll take you through one day in the life of a woman who sold her body here. Her name was Faustina. She was a slave, but also a goddess of love. A woman without rights, yet with the power to dominate a man's mind with a single glance. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more like it, give us a like and don't forget to subscribe. Get ready. We're entering a world where pleasure was part of everyday life.
Faustina opened her eyes. Her throat was dry. Above her, only a thin piece of cloth. Around her, just a few square meters of stone. In the corner, an oil lamp flickered. The air smelled of bodies and old oil. The curtain that served as a door stirred gently. Perhaps a draft, perhaps a client. Faustina stretched, ran her fingers through her hair, and reached for her perfume. She was ready. She always had to be.
A Roman lupanar wasn't about comfort. It was about efficiency. Small, dark, windowless rooms where everything revolved around one purpose. Each cell had only the bare essentials: a stone bed or raised ledge, sometimes covered with a thin blanket or mattress, a lamp, and a curtain instead of a door. When the curtain was drawn, it didn't mean privacy. It meant work in progress. Above the entrance to each room hung a wooden plaque. One side displayed the girl's name and her price in asses. The other side read occupata, occupied. If that side faced outward, everyone knew they had to wait. The prostitutes were property. Their bodies weren't their own. Most were slaves, girls who had been bought, stolen, or born into a system that treated them as tools for profit. Their owner, the leno, set the price, dictated what they could and couldn't do, and decided when they were allowed to rest. Sometimes he even dictated how they were supposed to smile. On average, a single act cost between 2 and 10 asses, cheap enough even for a regular tradesman. For comparison, a cup of wine in a tavern might cost 1 to 3 asses. The client came in, paid, took his pleasure, and left. No kisses, no tenderness, just a quick transaction. And yet, it was in these dim, stifling chambers that the purest form of Roman pleasure was born. It wasn't about love. It was about simulating it. Rehearsed movements, practiced expressions, carefully chosen tones of voice. For the Roman man, it was a moment of escape. For her, it was just one more mark on the tally.
Faustina pulled back the curtain and stepped into the corridor. The space was narrow and cramped, but the walls were alive. One painting showed a woman with her legs spread, tongue out, eyes begging for more. A few steps farther, a man gripped a handful of his partner's hair, wearing a look of triumph. And then there were the scenes of what she herself had done the night before, captured in vivid color, without censorship, without shame. She paused in front of one particular image. It was accurate. Her position, her mouth, his hands. The client had asked for it. She had delivered. And the painter, well, he clearly spent more time in the Lupanar than most Roman senators. Faustina smirked. That painting always worked. Men would stop there, just for a moment. Some smiled. Others reached straight for their coin pouch.
The walls of Roman Lupanaria were far from bare. They were covered in frescoes that today we would unhesitatingly call ancient pornography. Naked bodies in all manner of positions, vivid scenes full of gasps and tension, painted without censorship. These images had a clear purpose. They served as a visual menu, allowing clients to choose exactly what they were in the mood for. In an age when many brothel visitors couldn't read, images were the most direct language in the business of pleasure. Typically, the frescoes depicted 5 basic practices: vaginal intercourse, oral sex, cunnilingus, and both active and passive anal sex. And while that might sound explicit to modern ears, for Romans it was just part of the regular offerings. No more shocking than choosing the size of your coffee today. The reason these scenes survived in such vivid detail is due to tragedy. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD buried the city of Pompeii under layers of ash, preserving its Lupanaria as if frozen in time. The frescoes were left untouched, looking as if someone had just finished painting them. When archaeologists uncovered them thousands of years later, they were so shocked by the images that they chose to wall them back up. Too explicit, too shameless, too Roman. Today, we understand that these frescoes were an essential part of the business. They stimulated the imagination, simplified selection, and lured in passers-by just like a modern sex shop window. Everything was meant to entice. Everything was meant to sell. And it sold very well.
Faustina leaned her elbow against the cool stone wall and let her eyes wander across the carved messages between the paintings. She knew most of them had been scratched in by drunk legionaries, merchants, or craftsmen, either after their visit or while waiting in line. Some wanted to leave a message for future clients. Others just wanted to brag. Sabina didn't do much for me, she read aloud under her breath. Sabina was 3 doors down. Faustina, goddess of sex. That one was about her. She smiled. And then another, carved deeper, rougher. Today I had 5 girls. Beneath each name, a small phallus had been etched. Faustina reached out and ran her finger over her own name. It was there more than once. Each line had a different style, a different script, a different tone. Sweet Faustina. Faustina has the best ass in Pompeii. Faustina moans like a goddess.
The walls of Roman brothels weren't just covered in frescoes. They were also filled with text, scratched-in messages, notes, comments, and reviews. Clients etched the names of prostitutes, short statements about what they had just experienced, sometimes crude jokes or even little poems. These graffiti weren't rare. They were an integral part of the brothel environment. They served as a form of self-promotion and primitive service reviews, long before the internet. If someone wrote Lies Works Miracles with her tongue, it was clear that the next visitor would be curious. But if someone complained that Chloris just lies there like a dead fish, that woman might see fewer clients. It was also a game of masculinity. Men competed to show who had more, who tried more positions, who paid the most or the least. In a world where sexuality was a commodity, graffiti became a way to preserve the illusion of control. While the women were the objects to be used, men kept score. Every name of a prostitute, every act, became a notch on the belt, a personal trophy. Messages like, Placidus had whoever he wanted here, or Phoebus is quite the stud, said nothing about the women themselves. But they said everything about how Roman men saw themselves, as hunters, conquerors, in control of desire and of women. And when they couldn't control the woman in reality, they at least carved her into the wall.
Faustina sits on a small stool, a polished metal mirror in front of her. The daily ritual begins, not for her own sake, but for theirs. She slips into a sheer gown, a silk veil that reveals more than it hides. The fabric glides over her breasts and thighs. Then she reaches for the blonde wig. Her real hair is dark, but this is part of the rules. Blondes, they say, sell better. She fastens a simple gold hoop to her ear, a chain around her ankle. Clients like that. They say it makes her look like a slave. But it's not an illusion. It's the truth. Faustina looks into the mirror. She smiles. The performance is about to begin.
In the Roman world, clothing wasn't just about fashion. It was a language, a social code. A respectable Roman woman wore a long tunic covered by a stola, a simple, modest garment meant to send a clear message: chastity, dignity, inaccessibility. Prostitutes, on the other hand, wore the exact opposite: sheer dresses, bare arms, bold colors. Their fabrics were light, transparent, often made of silk or fine linen, provocative and seductive. Colors like scarlet, turquoise, or orange were taboo for respectable women, but for prostitutes, they were part of the uniform. Another key element was the blonde wig, or even bleached hair. Both legally and visually, it marked a clear distinction. It publicly signaled that the woman belonged to the category of infames, those without honor. Blonde hair became almost synonymous with prostitution. Romans associated it with northern slave women, Gauls, Germans, who were common on the sexual marketplace. Wearing a blonde wig carried an exotic, servile, and yet deeply erotic connotation. And it worked. Some prostitutes even wore the toga, traditionally a male garment. In their case, it wasn't a fashion choice, but a mandatory label, a mark of shame intended to tell every passerby. This woman is publicly available. The toga, otherwise reserved for free Roman male citizens, became an ironic symbol of public female nudity and lost dignity. Prostitutes in togas were walking advertisements and warnings, and Roman men knew instantly that with such a woman anything was permitted.
The curtain parts. A legionary enters with the confidence of a man who knows exactly what he's looking for. Wine stains mark his armor, a coin pouch in his hand. Faustina? He asks. He doesn't wait for a reply. He simply reaches out and drops 4 asses onto the stone ledge. Metal clinks against stone. There's no haggling. Her price is posted by the door. He flips the sign to occupata, occupied, and steps inside. Faustina swings one leg onto the bed, parts the fabric, and smiles. She plays the part, softly, skillfully. This isn't the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. It lasts 3 minutes, maybe 5, if she counts the pretending. The legionary stretches his back, fastens his belt, and walks out, as if he had just paid for a loaf of bread.
In Roman Lupanaria, everything had a price, even an orgasm. A typical session cost anywhere from 2 to 20 asses, with the average hovering around 10, a sum equal to about twice the daily wage of a manual laborer. In Pompeii, some encounters were recorded for as little as 2 asses, less than the price of a cup of wine in a tavern. But the money never went to the women. They were property. What they earned went straight to their leno, the pimp, the brothel owner, or the operator of the establishment. The prostitutes received, at best, food, water, and a chance to survive another day. Even that, however, could be taken from them at any time. Under Emperor Caligula, prostitution was officially taxed. Informally, it was called the sex tax. Every woman, man, or house of pleasure had to pay a fee equal to the standard price of a single service. The tax was collected either by state officials or, within the city of Rome, by the Praetorian Guard. Yes, the emperor's elite soldiers also served in part as collectors of sex revenue. The proceeds originally went into the state treasury, but since they were considered unclean money, Emperor Severus Alexander later redirected them to the upkeep of public buildings. So, in a strange twist of irony, when a temple was restored or a library expanded in ancient Rome, it was often, at least in part, thanks to prostitution.
He smelled of perfume and cinnamon when he entered. He wore a dark embroidered tunic, spotless sandals, and rings on both hands. There was no need to ask how much she cost. Men like him never ask. A wealthy merchant, perhaps someone from the city council, or simply a man who knew how to spend with elegance. Faustina was finishing her wine when his gaze settled on her neck. "Greek?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Athens?" "Corinth," she replied. He smiled and offered her more wine. He didn't rush. He spoke to her, not like an object, but like someone who had memories. For a moment, it felt like he was there for her. But then he unfastened his belt, and everything was as it always was.
Not all prostitutes in ancient Rome lived in dark stone chambers. There was also a higher class, courtesans, sought after not only for their bodies, but for their conversation. Some were slaves who, through beauty, intelligence, or luck, found their way to influential men. Others were free women who had chosen the role, often out of necessity, sometimes out of ambition. One such woman was Cytheris, a former slave who became the mistress of Mark Antony and was invited to elite banquets. Or Antonia Caenis, once enslaved, later the partner of Emperor Vespasian, who held enough influence to receive guests and conduct political business in his name. These women were often educated, versed in literature, music, and philosophy. They knew how to navigate society and how to please not just the body, but the ego. And yet, in the eyes of the law, they remained infames, women without honor. They could not testify in court. They could not marry a free Roman citizen. They could not inherit. And once they stepped into the world of paid sex, no amount of social elevation could erase that stain. Their names might be whispered at the feasts of the rich, but in legal documents, they carried no weight. They were revered and rejected, loved and ignored, luxurious, but still for sale.
It was night, but silence never came. From the street echoed laughter, shouting, tambourines, and singing. Floralia was in full swing. Faustina sat in her corner, a candle before her, and a chipped little statue of Venus. From the fresh flowers she had secretly brought from the market that day, she made a simple wreath. She laid it at the goddess's feet. She whispered a prayer. Not for freedom. That was pointless. Instead, she asked for health, for gentle clients, for less pain. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let herself drift with the sounds outside. The rhythm of drums, the laughter of women, the jingling of bells. They were all celebrating. Even those who were invisible the rest of the year. Tonight, at least, they could feel like part of the world.
Though Roman society pushed prostitutes to the margins, in the world of religion they surprisingly had their place. They had their festivals, their goddesses, and moments when they were allowed to step into the public space, if only for show. The most revered of these deities was, of course, Venus, the goddess of love, desire, and physical pleasure. The first days of April were dedicated to Veneralia, a festival honoring two goddesses, Venus Verticordia and Fortuna Virilis. During these rituals, even prostitutes could symbolically cleanse their souls. They washed the statue of the goddess, dressed it in fresh garments, and offered flowers and prayers. Respectable matrons stood beside them. For one day a year, the woman of shame and the woman of virtue stood side by side. Another special celebration was Floralia, a wild festival of fertility and pleasure, held at the end of April and beginning of May. It was untamed and popular in spirit. Nude dances, public stripteases, and often performances by prostitutes, acting out erotic scenes as part of the festivities. It was one of the few times when women like Faustina were not met with hypocrisy, but with genuine attention. They were allowed to be seen, allowed to laugh, allowed to dance. For one day, the line between virtue and indulgence blurred, and the women who spent the year selling their bodies could believe, even if just for a moment, that their prayer might carry weight. Prostitutes were everywhere in ancient Rome, legal, taxed, and regulated. Lupanaria stood in every major city, and men from all walks of life entered them without shame. Sex was not taboo. It was a part of life. And women like Faustina were seen as its practical facilitators. And yet, in the eyes of the law, these women were worthless. They belonged to the class of infames, people without honor, without rights. They had no true status. They were tolerated, but never respected, needed, yet despised. Their lives were a paradox. The law protected them, but society pushed them aside. They had set fees, had to be registered, and were required to pay taxes, yet their names were never spoken aloud. Men visited them in secret, then joked about them in the forum. They were seen as a means of protecting respectable wives from infidelity, while being excluded from the very world they were supposedly protecting. With the rise of Christianity, the image of prostitution changed. Where the pagan saw necessity, the Christian saw sin. Public brothels slowly disappeared, state regulation ended, not to grant women like Faustina dignity, but to redefine them as a moral threat. What had once been a tolerated pleasure became a condemned sin. The stigma endured. And to this day, many of those who sell their bodies still carry the weight of the same stares, the same judgment, cast long ago, behind the drawn curtain of a Roman lupanar. Did you enjoy this glimpse into the hidden pleasures of the ancient world? Support our channel with a like and subscribe, so we can dive together into more fascinating stories from history. For now, this is Horologium Historia signing off.